Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Today we have, I don't know, man, I was trying to think of a really great title for Ken. Ken is like the man
The
uh,
Master Man.
at Tamron. Ken Hubbard is, without question, one of the best educators and lecturers that we are fortunate enough to work with. And so he is going to go, we're going to go monochrome today. We're going to talk about black and white. And not just looking in black and white, but seeing maybe before the shot, some post process, a little bit of everything when it comes to black and white. So first time we've done this, and so I'm going to definitely hang out and listen to the whole thing as we go. As always, please, if you're in the audience, please make sure that you mute your mic and kill your video. It's not that we don't love you, but we wanted to make sure that everybody can see without interruption. If you have questions as we go along, type them out into the chat. I'm going to be monitoring that as we go along, and I will either pop in or wait until the very end. We don't want to interrupt stuff as we're going along, and we will have a great time. Patty is also here. Patty is our sales rep from Tamron. She's got a word or two, and then she's going to turn it over to Ken, and we will knock this out. So, Patty, it's all you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks again for joining us for a webinar with Cardinal Camera. This is the time of the year I would usually be in each of his stores, even in Charlotte, and I miss going to Charlotte, hopefully soon. But in order to stay in front of you and to keep you in touch with our product line and how it's growing, Cardinal Camera has been great enough to run our webinars. So today we have a great one with Ken Hubbard. He is just master of black and white photography, printing, everything. I mean, his work's amazing. I actually stole a piece. It hangs in my living room. and,
Oh, that's right, Amy.
um, we had a gallery showing one time, and I picked it up and brought it to my house, and then he picked it up at my house, and when he got home, he realized one was missing.
Yeah.
And
I don't think I ever got paid for that one.
no, you didn't. Anyway, going forward from that, um, and to show you our appreciation of everything that you've done for us by coming to our webinars, we have given Cardinal Camera bonus mail-in rebates on our lenses. So if you're interested in a Tamron lens this time of the year for yourself or as a gift, a lot of them have instant rebates. That will take off automatically. And then most of them will have a bonus rebate. And it ranges from $25 to $50. You just mail that in and we'll send you a check. So to take advantage of that bonus mail-in rebate, Tony will probably be mailing to you in his follow-up email the rebate form itself, and it's only good at Cardinal Camera, any other locations. And you could even call the store and they'll have them there as well. All right. So thank you again. Thank you for visiting us and staying tuned in with us, and everything. Just stay safe and have a great holiday season. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Patty. Thank you, Cardinal Camera, for hosting this event. This is probably one of my favorite classes to give, black and white photography. It goes back to when I was a young teenager and had a black and white studio in my parents' cellar, stinking up the cellar and chemicals everywhere and all that fun stuff. I do miss those chemical days, but with digital photography, it has really opened it up to many more people to really take advantage of what black and white has to offer. So let's go monochromatic today. We're going to talk about black and white photography. My name is Ken Hubbard. I am the field service manager for Tamron. I've been there officially 20 years this coming January. That's a pretty long time. So I've been through a lot with them. I'll go through some housekeeping in the first few slides. Basically, in the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to be able to see what camera lens that I use for each of the images. So you can be like, oh, if you have a question, why would you choose the 18-400 for this particular image? Or, why the 15-30? I'll be honest with you right up front. Sometimes it's the lens I had at the moment, but other times it was pre-planned. Like, this is what I'm going to shoot with. This is why I'm going to shoot with it. So first off, we're going to talk about what's usually in my camera bag at any given time. There was a day when I had my big old low pro backpack that I would fill probably everything you see on the screen now and more into my camera bag. But As you get older, everybody knows the lighter you want to go. So I'm a little bit more specific with what I bring. I still do bring quite a bit of stuff with me because I am a believer of doing it correctly in the field as well as I can. Everything from, you can see accessories, speed lights, mini reflectors, diffusers, tripods, flashlights, circular polarizers, neutral density, density filters, graduated density filters. But when it comes to camera bodies and lenses, I have streamlined that a little bit. I've been using more and more the mirrorless systems, and thankfully they are as light as they are. And I'll normally have with me at any given time the 17 to 28 Sony, 2875 Sony, and the 28 to 200. Always have something close to a all-in-one lens with me because it basically covers everything I need very quickly. If I'm just driving along and something happens, I could just have that sitting on the back seat of the car, grab it and go. Full frame, of course, wide angle 15 to 30, 24 to 70, 70 to 200, and a nice macro. APS-C, yep, I do shoot an APS-C, 10 to 24 and 18 to 400 when I'm carrying light, especially, you know, when you're on those family vacations that you just don't have the room to go completely full frame and bring everything you want. So, you know, APS-C still goes with me, and I do shoot an APS-C body when I do wildlife photography, especially birding. I like to have that extra crop factor right there when I'm looking through the viewfinder. So with that being said, like I said, in the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to see those lens designations. So when you see DI, as in Tamron 35 millimeter DI VC USD, those are for full frame. The nice thing about those lenses is that, yes, you can use them on APS-C cameras as well. It covers the sensor. But for you APS-C shooters, if you see DI2, like the 18 to 400 DI2, that's going to be designed solely for your crop sensor camera. You can put them on the full frame. They will mount there. But if your camera does not have an auto crop feature, you'll get some vignetting on the wide side. We don't want to miss all you mirrorless shooters, so we do make mirrorless system lenses for Sony, Panasonic, Olympus, but our biggest lineup is for Sony. So when you see DI3, those are going to be your mirrorless system lenses, like the 2875 DI3. Do I use color filters? I just saw that one pop up quickly. Not often. I'll be honest, that's the one where I start leaning towards post-production and some of the programs that I use, if I'm going to start throwing in color filters in there. And for black and white, I know in black and white, if you wanted to add contrast right away in the field, I believe, what was it, the orange filter you would put on there and it'd add a little bit more contrast to the scene. I don't do that currently because I will explain this later, but I do shoot in color, and I'll go into more detail about that when I shoot. So why black and white? The world is color, and most of us see in color, and it's beautiful. But color has this wow factor that can sometimes distract you from the finer details of an image. So when I'm looking at something that isn't quite that great in color, as in this scene, here's the color version of it. Not so good. You know, it's an incredibly stormy day. Can I color correct it and do other things to make it a little bit more exciting? Sure, but ultimately it's not the greatest color image to me. And there's a lot of detail going on in here, especially in those clouds and in the mountains and the reflections and all this going on, that I want to take away that color, the distraction of the color here, the blues, the tans, and all that, and then turn it into black and white. It, to me, just becomes a richer image. Not every image is meant to be black and white, and I'm going to talk about that in detail later on, but some definitely turn out better and are more appreciated go into black and white because you're looking at the details of the image. Even with something simple, a beautiful flower. This is a nice purple color against that green with a solid black background, and I'm trying to simplify this image as possible, and it's nice in the color to me. You know, you could put this in a book documenting the type of flower it is, but what I love about this image is the texture of the petals and water droplets on top of it. So taking away that color and just making it tones of gray makes it a little bit more attractive to me, makes it a little bit more impactful. And again, if you don't feel that way towards certain images, that's okay. This is photography. It's your opinion of what you want to do. But I will say definitely there are images that will work better in black and white here and there. But like I said, not every one. People, I love shooting people. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. And in this particular scene, this is the streets of New Orleans in the French Quarter. And she was not as tough as she looks in this particular image. She was a lot more friendly. She sits there and has a serious face on. And I walked up, asked her if I could take her picture, put $5 down on her table. And she started smiling and laughing and said, absolutely. So it's amazing what $5 can do if you want to take somebody's picture, for sure. But she was great because we talked a little bit beforehand. She was laughing, telling me some jokes about some people of New Orleans. And I just love the scene. She asked if she wanted to move from the center of the street. I'm like, no, it's perfect, because what I was looking at, her sitting in the center of the street in color was nice because it had some depth. I have the lines of the balconies here, the lines of the street back there. I opened up my aperture to about 1.8 or 2.0 to really drop out that background to make it more dimensional. But there was something a little distracting to me. It was the wrap around her head. I kept on going to that purple, not her face. I kept on going to that purple for some reason because it was so striking. But when you take that away, you take away the distraction of the color. Now I go straight to her face and I look at her, and that's what I want to do in this image. Still, the distraction of the color in the background, everything becomes more dimensional to me. So sometimes just look at things in black and white. A nice thing about some of the cameras today is that you can actually shoot in black and white and see it right there. And you can actually shoot in black and white black and white raw files, excuse me, which allows you to, if you want to bring it back to color, you can. So it's really neat what you can do and see in black and white. Now I'm going to get into some of the camera settings of what I do. I am a true believer in no matter what kind of photography I'm doing, I want to shoot at the lowest ISO possible, in the sense that, and the reason why is I want the best image possible. I know in today's cameras, the Sony cameras, Nikon cameras, all those, you can shoot at pretty high ISOs. I'm gonna ask a question out there. How many people have used T-Max 3200 black and white film? Back when I was shooting, I would pull that out when I wanted to be artistic because it had so much grain. If you guys want to type that into the chat box, if anybody has used it, I would just like to see if anybody remembers that old T-Max 3200. No matter how slow or how cold you develop that film, it was grainy as anything. But 3200 today is pretty awesome. It works out pretty well. But with that being said, with black and white images, I want to bring that ISO as low as possible, because now in the scenes like this foggy morning in Apalachicola, Florida, you have this incredible gradient of gray here, which is really soft. And I want to minimize the amount of noise that's going in there. If I'm going to add grain to this image, I'm going to do it in post. I want to be able to control how much I'm going to put on there. And a lot of times, and I'm going to repeat this a couple of times, a lot of times the amount of grain I add into an image has to do with the paper I'm printing it on. A gloss paper, I tend to reduce the amount of grain. I don't want to see it as much, where a fiber-based matte paper can handle it a little bit more. But like I said, I lower my ISO to reduce the amount of noise possible just to have the cleanest image. And I'm gonna work it later on. With that being said, talking about post-production and adding grain into an image, every single image in here has been worked in Photoshop. One of the softwares I use Photoshop with the Nik plugin, the Silver Effects Pro. absolutely fantastic. Every image was processed in that particular software. I do shoot in Adobe RGB color space. So you have two major settings that you can do in your camera: sRGB or Adobe RGB. Some cameras have Pro RGB, some cameras have a couple of other things, but Adobe RGB is the most used now. And think of it this way: think of a rainbow of color in this weird gobbledygook of a formation, and then you have this rounded triangle sitting on top of it. That's your RGB. That's telling you how much color of the gamut range that you're taking in. So our sRGB is like that, taking in that color and that gamut range, where Adobe RGB is that. It's taking in more. So the more colors I can take in, the more tones I can take in, all that I want to work with. So when you have a colorful scene like in Dublin, Ireland, the streets of Dublin, Ireland, I want to take in all that color because I do shoot in Adobe RGB and in color. I'm going to take that color file and then transport it into black and white. So the more I have to work with, I'm a little bit greedy that way. I want to work with the most amount of information possible. I want to take it all. I'm going to, work with it and then adjust it. It just gives me a little bit more latitude to make my adjustments to where I want it to be. Now, I will admit, color images, yeah, there's a lot of times that you can shoot a color image and then just take it out of the camera and it'll be great. Black and white images sometimes take a little bit more finesse in the sense of maybe dodging a side of the building to make it a little bit lighter, or burning the side of a building, making it a little bit darker. It takes that to make it actually work and make it pop. I usually tell this story a little later in this presentation, but it's a good time to do that because of showing, creating the right amount of contrast, the right amount of dynamic range in there. The very first image I ever developed in a chemical darkroom was down in my cellar. I did everything. I did all the settings on the enlarger, took my little magenta gel filters, thinking of adding a little bit more contrast to it, did test strips, did all this stuff. Went through everything, the developer, the fixer, the stop, everything, looked at it, dried it, and thought, wow, that's amazing. I found that image a few years later after I got a little bit more proficient in black and white and looked at it and went, wow, that's really bad. That is just horrendously bad. Black and white is definitely one of those types of photography that you have to develop an eye for the final product that you're producing. You have to work your eye in practice. My suggestion, if you're not a developer of black and white and you want black and white images, bring it to a place like Cardinal Camera and have them print some for you. They are printers, they know how to do stuff, and they'll print it with a proper amount of contrast so you can see for examples, and then go back and try and work your images to that black and white that they're doing. Learn from example. And that's what it was. For me, it was trial and error over and over and over again until I started realizing and researching other photographers, black and white photographers, and saying, oh, yeah, that's more impactful, having a little more contrast there, or a little flatter over there. Working the image, making it the most impactful that it can be. Also, to help me work these images, I shoot everything in RAW. I want all the information. So what RAW does is it takes in everything. Think of it as your digital negative. It takes in all the information that the scene is giving you, where a JPEG file is actually throwing out redundant information. And that's how it's able to compress the files down to much smaller size. I don't want that. I want to keep. I told you before, I'm greedy when it comes to information in my images, and I want to keep it all. So I shoot in RAW. I will admit my cameras are set to RAW and JPEG, but my JPEGs are just for quick reference. That's all. So I can go through them quickly and look like, oh, that'll make a good one, that'll make a good one. Or maybe if I'm coloring printing small 4x6 color images, I'll use the JPEG files. But when it comes to images that I know I'm going to work on and I'm going to manipulate, I'm going straight to my RAW files because it has all that information. Here, you know, when you have these images that have deep shadows, midtones, a lot of highlights, there's a lot going on in that scene. And like I said, having that raw file allows me to work this image. And I know some of you say, you know, maybe, you know, if you're manipulating all these images, are they still an image? And well, if Ansel Adams would still be alive, he would tell you absolutely yes, because I was fortunate enough to go when I was up in Rochester once, with Kodak. I went to their museum and went down into the archives with a friend of mine who knew the curator there. And he pulled out one of Ansel Adams' old negatives and he laid it down on a table on a white piece of paper. And I looked at it and my first thought, I didn't say it out loud, but my first thought was, wow, that negative is really, really faded. It must have been sitting somewhere in a near a window or something and just got completely faded. But it turns out that is exactly how Ansel Adams would expose and develop his negatives, much more on the flat side. Why? Because he would take that negative into the dark room and literally manipulate the heck out of it. I gotta watch myself there. He would work it and he would do different things, use different chemicals, dodging, burning, all the stuff to create the masterful black and white photos that he did. And I honestly believe that he would really enjoy digital photography today and the amazing ability computers have made it for everyone to be able to create these images. So create the best file possible, create the file using raw settings to get as much image information as possible to allow you to do the work that you need to image to really make it impactful and good. So expose your images correctly, take your time and do it correctly in the field. We're photographers. It's meant to be enjoyable and it's meant to be fun. So why would you want to rush it? You know, snap and go, snap and go, snap and go. Have fun out there. Take your time and create the best image possible in the field. So first thing to doing that is learn your histogram and read your histogram to take the proper exposure. I remember long ago when digital was first coming out, a photographer was sitting in on their seminar and they said histograms lie. And I didn't quite understand that because numbers really don't lie. And basically what a histogram is a numeric representation of your exposure, from shadows on the left to highlights on the right and everything in between. So understanding what's going on in your scene and what it should look like represented in a histogram is extremely important, and knowing when your shadows are too mucked up or your highlights are too blown out and all that. So learn. And not every histogram is going to look the same. Going back to that one of the very first images I showed you, I brought out this one because there is so much going on in this scene. You do have very deep blacks. If you look at my histogram, the top left-hand corner, you have a lot of blacks going on in here that are pushed to the left. And I'm okay with that because it's this deep, dark black area over here and this area down here to the right. That is black. This was a super stormy day and I had super bright highlights. I had really deep, rich shadows. And I don't mind that getting pushed to the left a little bit and it's going to solid black because that's what it should be. I'm more concerned about this right side because of these clouds. I do not want to blow them out and lose detail. Yeah, Lightroom and Photoshop and a lot of these programs develop raw files now that you can convert your raw files. You can save your highlights, but you are limited. Remember that. You don't have ultimate flexibility with those highlights. You have some ability with those highlights to bring that detail back. So I still today will underexpose my images by a quarter, maybe even a half a stop at times, knowing that I can control these areas, the shadow areas, better than I can control the highlights. So that's what I'm shooting for. So you have a lot of highlights here, you have a lot of shadow here, but look at that center, that nice bell curve. That's all those other grays, those other tones of gray that are in the scene, and there are a lot of them. So that's why you have this really nice bell-shaped curve. I'm going to show you more histograms later on to go through it, but before I do, I want to go over tonal range and dynamic range. Tonal range are the amount of shades of gray in between your highlights and your shadows, your whites and your black. So a high tonal range image is kind of represented like this top left-hand corner right here where it says high and high, both on dynamic and tonal range. Notice how smooth that is. So going back to this one, this is a high tonal range image. You have shadows, you have highlights, and you got a ton in between. There's a lot going on there. So this is a high tonal range image. A low tonal range image won't have as many shades of gray. And I'm going to show you, after I go through this graph here, images of each of these. You have low tonal ranges where you don't have many stops. You have this gray area, but not many stops. You have a lot in there, but not a lot going in between. And then a low tonal range. This is a high tonal range, bottom left, and a low tonal range, not many stops, a lot of stops. So then there's dynamic range, going from highlight to shadow, where with tonal range, that's how many tones of gray that are in from your highlights to shadows. Dynamic range is the actual amount of stops in between your highlights and shadows, where here, we're going to go back to the high again. You have a white and a black. There's a lot of steps, a lot of stops between that dynamic range. The one right below it, there's not many stops. There's gray and then slightly darker gray. And then low dynamic range as well. There's just not many going on in there. So reading that, understanding what's going on, I'm going to show you to you in image form as well. Ken, do you use the histogram when shooting, editing, or both? I use my histogram, but both. That's a great question. I will always double check, even when I'm using Nik software, because they give you in a couple of the programs that histogram that you can see if you're pushing it too far, because I might be looking at my image and thinking, oh, okay, I'm pretty safe with those highlights. But then when I go down to my histogram, I know I might have pushed it too far. So I do in both my camera, I'll be double checking my histogram, and in Photoshop, Lightroom, and Nik, I'll be double checking my histogram as well. So going back to tonal range and dynamic range, here's an example of both wide tonal range and high dynamic range. So wide tonal range is this. You see that histogram like that. There's a lot of grays in there, and both from your highlight to your shadow. You're going from whites to darks and a lot of grays in between. It's also a high dynamic range because of this. You look in the bright spot of that clouds, represented by this little push against the right-hand side there, and then this dark tree right here that's pretty much silhouetted black by that. So there's a lot of steps in between here and a lot of tones in between there. So you got the high dynamic, the stops, the amount of stops between this highlight and shadow, and the amount of tones between that highlight and shadow as well. They're both high, both a lot going on there. Here is a wide tonal range, but a lower dynamic range. So the stops between the highlights and the shadows, the amount of physical stops, have been reduced, but the amount of shades of gray, as represented how high these peaks are going, are still very wide. There's a wide amount of grays in there, even though my dynamic range has shrunk. And that's represented by, it's no longer pushing to the shadow side, it's moving more towards the center middle grays, which are represented by this down here, and the highlights up here. And if you look, let me just move something, it doesn't even reach the point of white here. And I don't want it to, because this area in here and this area in here in the rock are the brightest spots, but they're not supposed to be white. This was a very gray day. So think about your image. A lot of people say, well, I'll push the histogram, the slider over to the edge on the right and then to the left, but maybe your image isn't supposed to look that way. If I did the slider all the way to the shadow side, these would have gotten much too dark and my highlights would have got much too bright and it wouldn't have the same feel of what I'm looking for. This is what the scene is, and this is how it should look. Now, a narrow tonal range, and a wide dynamic range. I know there's a lot going on here with this, but just, for reference later on, you can email me or just Google what is tonal range, what is dynamic range, as a refresher to what is going on with this. So this is a narrow tonal range. Why? Because I have a lot of whites and black. That's what I have. I don't have much in between except for a little bit of gray in the center and a little bit of gray of shadowing. So that's why it's a narrow tonal range. There's not that many tones of gray here. It's basically white and basically black. And look at that histogram. You can see that pushed all the way to the left and all the way to the right. But yet it's still it's a wide dynamic range. Why? Because it's white and it's black. I have whites here and I have a solid black there. So that's where that wide dynamic range, the stops in between the highlight in the scene and the shadow. Last but not least, narrow tonal range and low dynamic range. This is what my first print actually looked like. And I will say, most people, their first attempts at printing or doing black and white, this is the direction they go because they're afraid to push things too far. So their images end up looking muddy. They have a narrow tonal range and a low dynamic range. Nothing is going to the shadows. Nothing is going to the heights. Everything's in the middle, and there's just not much there at all. So narrow tonal range, low dynamic range. I'd rather people who are first getting into this push their images too far in the sense of contrast and stuff. To me, it's a little easier to come back from that. But when you look at things and things are muddy, it's sort of like, well, what do I do with that? One of the best things you can do is download and Google the grayscale zone system. There's an 8-step zone system or a 10-step. This is just a representation to help you learn what shades of gray, what tones of gray are represented by what subjects. Look for one that was landscape shadows are around a 4. Dark stones are around a 4. Average weathered wood is a little bit brighter, so it's a 5. I'm not so much worried about the numbers. I'm more worried about what shade of gray they are. And the more you can start teaching yourself and learning as you look at the scene in front of you, what shades of gray are going to be represented of the subject that you're shooting, because it can fool you, especially with color. So this color wheel, if you see color well, you can see the differences between the yellows, yellow greens, greens, blue green, blue, blue violet, violet. They all have different looks to them. And that's what's great about color. You see the difference between them. Unfortunately, if you take this color wheel and you turn it to grayscale, the tone of gray that these colors will be, they start looking really similar, except for a few of them down in this blue-green, blue-violet zone. They kind of start separating themselves. But you look at these, there is difference in these on the left and the top left-hand side, but it's very, very subtle. And that's why a lot of people get tricked by a beautiful garden or a landscape that has tremendous amount of color to it. They'll be like, oh, that's going to make a great, great black and white. Well, maybe. It all depends on what tones and what colors they are, and that's the key. So here you can see the separation here, but the black and white or the grayscale next to it, not so much. So with that being said, I'm going to come back to that, and I'm going to get a little bit more detail about that. Understand what is going on in your scene and look at it. Even if you have something like this image on the left-hand side that looks like it's all just shades of orange. That's exactly what I'm looking for. All different shades of orange, some lighter, some darker, some even turning to white on the tips of them. That's what it is. Look at your scene as tones, not color. And ask yourself, what will this look like? A good test for you is, you can go outside later today and in your backyard, go out, look at the scene and try to visualize it in black and white. Don't take a picture, don't do anything, just try to visualize it. Go get your camera and then start taking pictures of it, bring it back to the computer and just turn it to grayscale quickly, just to see. Or if you have a camera that shoots black and white or whatever, look at it, have it show up on your screen and be like, well, not quite what I thought, or exactly what I thought. And that's good. The more you do that, the better, because when you look at your scene in tones, even though this is all just different shades of orange, that's exactly it. They're different shades. Where it's brighter orange, you see the lighter tone. Where it's darker orange, it's a darker tone, and even darker in here. This is a shade of orange. It may, depending on your screen, look like it's a black shadow, but it's not. It actually has some reddish tone in there, but here it turns to that nice rich black, and that's what you want. Meter for your main subject. Make sure that is correct, especially in a scene like this that has an incredibly big dynamic range going from these highlights up here to these shadows down here. You want to make sure you save all that detail, especially when you have all those lines in there. And I think of my DSLR in the sense of chrome film. Chrome film was a little bit more sensitive to highlights. You had to really make sure you saved your highlights when using chrome film. Same with digital. Today it's getting bigger, better and better and better. Your dynamic ranges of your cameras are getting broader and broader and wider and can handle that gap between them much better. But still, I still kind of, like I said, I would rather underexpose a little bit, a quarter, half a stop, than lose it. Here again, exposing for these guys, looking at it. This particular scene right away of these wild horses in California, it's exactly what I was saying about looking at it in black and white. Not just because the horses were a white one and a black one, but because the whole scene, the background, everything, the kicking up of the dust underneath them to bringing a highlight, separating them from the background a little bit. That's what I was looking at. And that's what I was thinking about when creating and wanting to go to black and white. This was never going to be a color image. Right away, I can see, yeah, it's shot in 10, 11 o'clock light, not the greatest light for warmth or anything like that, but that didn't matter to me. It was just everything that's going on, the speckled colors of the speckled texture of both of their bodies, the white on their heads, the black manes on both of them. Like I said, the key was this waiting for them to kick up enough dust to create some separation and then turning it to a black and white. What I love too is scenes that normally in color that are nothing or basically nothing can be actually really nice. In this particular scene, sorry, I was just checking what number I was on. This particular scene, Zion National Park, the Court of the Patriarchs, rained all day, then got about 1 or 2 inches of snow just to frost everything. It's early spring, so nothing has bloomed yet, so it's a little gray. Even the sky, you don't even really see much texture in the sky. But I took the picture anyway, not for a color image, but for a black and white. And even you see more detail in the sky. And that's what I mean. You start seeing that detail a little bit more. Even as simple things as this mission near Carmel, California. I looked at this and was staring at it. And, your family, the more you do photography, the more crazy your family think you are. Because I was kind of staring at this for a couple of minutes, and I had brought my parents down to California, and my mom comes over and she just goes, "Are you okay?" I go, "Yeah, I'm just kind of looking at this wall and the window with the grate on it and everything." And I'm like, "I'm going to take a picture." And she's like, "Well, okay, then we'll be over there." And it was just a matter of looking at and going, you know what? I'm going to go to black and white with this, because color, you're losing all that texture. Can I bring it out more in this image, darken it up and do other things to it? Sure. Just doesn't have the same impact when you bring it to black and white. It just gives it the feel, the old feel of that grate, and that wall really makes it much better as a black and white image, and adding just a subtle sepia tone to it, so it gets a little bit more of a bronze, just a tiny bit of bronze. And yes, I did burn the edges as well. I tried to do things, and that's what I talked about Nik software before, allows you to do a lot of things that naturally you could do in a dark room as well. Animals, perfect. And especially animals. What I'm looking at with this particular wolf of Lakota Wolf Preserve is the fur and the eyes. I mean, that brindle fur on this guy is just fantastic. What is Nick software? I'm going to go into that a little later. So, Melanie, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail towards the end. So I'll let you know all about that. This to me is both a color image just because of that beautiful fur, the beautiful animal that's in front of me, but looking at this in tones, try to visualize what it's gonna look like in a black and white, and let me know if you can see it that way. Yes, it's a little bit of work. I add a little bit more contrast afterwards, so I punch the difference between the highlights and shadows and midtones a little bit more, but to me it works incredibly good because of all those tones as well, especially the face, having that darker fur on top and coming down the nose, and then this sort of U-shaped highlight underneath. It's just, it almost makes him look like he's smiling a little bit more than he actually is at me, instead of looking at me like he wants to eat me, which he kind of does. So composition, it's the same as anything. Think about composition. It doesn't matter just because it's black and white, it needs to be a little different of a composition. It doesn't. Think about the rule of thirds. Think about where to place things, where your subject, your main subject can be. But with that being said, I'm going to talk about breaking the rule of thirds a little bit. The rule of thirds here is sort of, yeah, and in a way, it's kept in place by moving this church in Iceland over to the left-hand side, the left third. But normally, because of the way it's facing, this back to the right and then the front to the left, normally my first reaction would have pushed the church over to the right hand side of the frame, so the movement goes more towards the negative space. Instead, I let a little bit more negative space behind the church, and the reasoning why is, instead of the church being kind of the main subject, I'm using it as a leading line. It's just another element in my scene where you go to the front, then the side of the building, which is the side where the sun is really nicely lit, creating a nice line into the cemetery and then the bowl of the mountain. So it's a continuous image. I want you to start here and then look through there. So that's where I broke the rule of thirds a little bit. Instead of having this church on the right-hand side, there were better elements, on the right-hand side of this church. So I moved the church to the left-hand side and used it as an element to draw you into the scene. People, moving their heads and bodies away from that center third. But in this case, there's multiple elements to the scene, and pay attention to that when composing your images. Look for things that will complement the subject and become secondary subjects within the scene. So this is Carson down in Apalachicola. He is a oyster fisherman down there, and is, again, much nicer than what he may seem to look like. He's a little rough around the edges, but he's a super nice guy. We talked with him about 2-3 hours, taught us a lot about the oysters and the farming and everything that goes on down there, and now not going on for the next couple of years down there. But setting it up, moving him, sitting him on the dock, facing inward to the dock, so he's facing the boat in the background, the Wolverine boat in the background, to kind of make it represent that it's his boat, his dock, and then having this secondary dock framing that side of it. So this all becomes the main subject on the left-hand side, leading you to the secondary subject framed by the dock on the right-hand side. So really, a lot of times what you can do is just don't start shooting. Just don't, if it's a person or a place or a building or even a landscape, don't just start shooting right away. Look at your scene, try to dissect it, add elements that are complementary to each other to make it really work. And leading lines, even with animals, leading lines, a lot of people think it's just a roadway. Leading lines is this: his body is my leading line, the out of focus body coming in from the top left-hand side, working its way down to his face that's in focus on the right-hand third. So this is the links over at Lakota Wolf Preserve. And of course, They always look at me like I'm food or something. I think Becky put a piece of something on my head. That's why he's looking up there. Use lines, literal lines to the drawer people in. And here I'm breaking the rule of thirds again by putting it dead center in the frame, but I'm okay with that because I have this beautiful spiral going through the frame and up into the center and then out. The steps lead to nowhere, but that's okay. It kind of adds a little bit of mystery to the scene that's in front of me. What time of day? Any time of day is fantastic to shoot black and white. So if you're going out to shoot one day solely for black and white images, you're not going to get a lot of rest that day because it's not something where you stop at noon and say, no, the light's not good. And I'll explain in a second. Here, early morning, you get that just before sunrise, that beautiful soft light of the Alabama hills here in the foreground, Mount Whitney of the Sierras in the background. And that's what I love about black and white too, is those contrasts between the snow that's on Whitney and the brightness of that, but yet the gray and the darker area of the Alabama hills in the foreground. You get that beautiful separation. And you have this rock that kind of looks like King Kong walking back and forth in the background back there. See some strange things in my images when I turn them to black and white. Here's another one. This is what I'm talking about, midday. I love to shoot black and white midday. And that's why I'm not waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to make sure I'm getting there for sunrise because it's not always necessary. A lot of the images you see were shot in the middle of the day because I love those super bright highlights and deep shadows and working it together. It makes for me for a very dynamic image for midday. Late afternoon is the same as morning. Beautiful soft light, all that. So any time of day really, really works perfectly. Weather, for me, the worse the weather, sometimes the better. This is up in Iceland again, and this day was frustrating. I mean, I wasn't necessarily going to shoot color there in Iceland, black and white in Iceland, more color stuff there. But this day was crazy. I mean, it would snow, sleet, then rain, then sunny for about 5 seconds, then snow, sleet, rain again. And it just was too much. It was just unbelievable. But the mood that weather gave for a black and white image, those clouds, those really soft clouds going against the harshness of those mountains, those really pointed peaks, works really well. And then the black sand dunes with a little bit of dune grass on them to highlight for it, made for a pretty strong black and white. Weather again, pay attention to your weather apps. Make sure you have a good weather app on your cell phone to make sure you know when storms are breaking, because that's when you're going to get the most dramatic clouds. You're going to get all different types of gnarly clouds up in the sky. This is the Tetons, and all night long from the day before to all night, and even that morning, it kept on saying about an hour before sunrise, going to start breaking, and it did. It broke about an hour before sunrise, and those clouds started to separate and get some bright ones and some dark ones and some separation to make for really great weather. So you're also going to get wet as a photographer, especially shooting for black and white, because bad weather usually makes for dramatic light, which will create dramatic black and white images. Fog, ultimately, some of the best images are fog and moody. It's just the nature of what it is. It creates such an incredible tonal range of grays from highlights to shadows. In this image, you're going for almost pure white in the top to beautiful black silhouettes here on the left. This image, actually, I've been showing for a long time, and the very first time I showed this image, somebody raised their hands and asked, they honestly asked me if I had a bad childhood. I was just like, what? Why would make you think I had a bad childhood? He's just like, normally people don't take pictures that are this moody of playgrounds. I go, no, I had a pretty good childhood. It's just, it's just I saw it and I liked it. And he goes, well, I guess I'm a psychologist, so I must be thinking into it a little bit too much. I go, yeah, probably. Because honestly, what I was doing, I was shooting the sailboats behind me, but because the sun that was already up was coming from behind me and hitting that fog, it was becoming very flat. So I turned around to see what the backlit fog looked like, and this just hit me in the face. And without even thinking, just started snapping pictures, concentrating on framing, keeping, these different posts and stuff in the frame, and it ends up, you know, being a dramatic image. So not every image has to have meaning and be deep in thought, but you know, I guess I could say, yeah, you know, my parents wouldn't let me go down slides, and that's why I feel so bad now today. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's just an image that presented itself, and I took the picture in this case. Here as well, just fog. Weather and fog makes for great images. You know, this boat that's nice and bright in the foreground, and then the boat in the background that's getting swallowed up by some of that fog. What kind of subjects? Of course, landscapes. Landscapes are my go-to for black and white, the ones I shoot the most, but they're fantastic. I mean, especially when you start getting into these mountains like Sedona and Arizona area and Utah, where they have these incredible highlights and shadows of their red rocks on a cloudy day. Makes for incredible images. Just note, I do use circular polarizers, but sometimes the higher I go in elevation, I stop using the circular polarizer. Like here, I'm in Sedona, so I think Sedona is something like 6 or so thousand feet, 5,000 feet. So the higher you go in elevation, the naturally darker your sky is going to get. So you might not need that circular polarizer to get that contrast between cloud and blue sky. You can use it to your advantage if you want to do something a little different. You know, say you go to 8,000 feet of the Grand Canyon and you want to turn that sky black, use your circular polarizer, and it can actually make it go really, really dark, abnormally dark. It make for an interesting image as well. People, especially like Slim Fats here, incredible Delta blues singer down in Apalachicola. When you have a face like that, it's simply put, that face was meant for black and white. The wrinkles in the face, the frosting gray of his goatee and beard, and those eyes. His eyes are really, really stunning in black and white. So people, and that's what I mean. You don't worry about color. You concentrate on the detail in the face. And in this, because of course his eyes are super sharp as well and dynamic, my eyes go right to his, and that's what I'm looking for. And wildlife, where some wildlife, yep, you saw before earlier with the wolves, both color and black and white work great, but in this case, these are always going to be black and white because of the tones that were given. You know, this is a little bit later on in that same scene you saw earlier, and this is actually the shot I love best out of the sequence. And you see how much dust has now, compared to the other one, has gone up, and that dust has created even more separation between them and the background. The one key thing I will say, when you're shooting scenes like this, these are wild horses just outside of Bishop, California, in the Upper Sierras on the eastern side of them. When you have a scene like this, and this is one of the first times, you know, I had ever seen anything like this, I will admit my reaction was, holy cow, holy cow, holy cow. Maybe a little bit more colorful than that. Shooting straight through it, and when that black one, that darker one, reared up and came down on the white one, I was just, you know, I was saying to myself, wow, 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 wow. But I also was telling myself, keep shooting, don't stop, don't stop, don't stop, until they both ran off in opposite directions. A lot of time your reaction is going to be stop and see if you got the image. Chances are you're going to stop and you're going to miss the image. So shoot straight through. Here again, just go through it, and ultimately black and white with these. Architecture, love architecture for black and white. It's pretty self-explanatory, especially when you have those great highlights, shadows, and midtones all working together. This is the old railroad station for Ellis Island over by Liberty State Park, and they're letting this deteriorate. Great for black and white. Don't forget to look down sometimes. Look around, look you know, behind you, above you, all these places. All this is textures and line in a rock that's between my feet. I was sitting there shooting the seashore along the California coast, and I look down and I see that. Was never going to be a color image, always looked at it as tones and lines and a black and white image. All images are not black and white. This particular image here, you know, the red against the green, fantastic. Great complementary colors. The red of that little flower works perfectly. But in black and white, yeah, can I work that background a little bit more? But the tones are just too close for me. It becomes very, very flat. Some images work both ways. Here is a great example of the infamous barber chair that keeps moving around in Eastern State Penitentiary. The red chair against the green mold and the bronze color of the walls all work fantastic together. But to add in, make it a little bit more moody of an image, works just as great in black and white. This is Red Rock Crossing in Sedona, Arizona. Great colors, you know, warm setting sun just starting to happen, but black and white, because of all the texture and the tones that are in these rocks and in these leaves, works really great in black and white as well. And then some are better in black and white than they are as color. Here in Yosemite National Park, beautiful place for color images, but not this morning. Not a cloud in the sky. It was almost this metallic blue color in the sky that was very close to the granite walls of the mountains there. Fog was coming up to make it even duller. I could have worked the scene a little bit, but would never be anything really worthwhile of an image. Turn it to black and white, and look how much more detail you see just down in these trees and fog alone, going to that black and white, you know, making it a little bit more contrasty here, so all that detail comes out. So realize some images are both color, some images are black and white, some images are just color. So you never know what it's going to be. Converting from color to black and white, I'm going to quickly go through to show you some examples. This is down in Barbados, a rum distillery down there, actually a really good one down there. So there's different ways you can do it. You can turn your image to black and white by just going into Photoshop and Lightroom and turning it to grayscale. The problem is you're throwing out all the color information in there and just turning that all to black and white. So your image will look okay, but will still need a little bit work to it. What happens a lot with these is bright areas become very flat. You lose the separation and dynamic range, and your dark shadows, like the doorway here, become very black, and they just go to that. The other thing you can do is you can desaturate your image as well. And what that does is, instead of throwing away all the color information, it keeps it there, but just desaturates it and turn those colors to gray. You know, so it keeps it. It's still an RGB file, just showing as gray, which is good, a little bit better than grayscale. But then in your programs, you have something called Channel Mixer. It'll desaturate everything, but it'll still, because it's still an RGB file, an Adobe RGB, hopefully, or sRGB, whatever you shot it in, it'll take those channels, those color channels, the yellows, the reds, the greens, the blues, and then you can make those brighter and darker, ultimately giving you more control to brighten certain colors that are in there or darken certain colors that are in there. But Nick Silver Effects Pro or Silver Effects Pro is still, to me, some of the best way to do it, because you have ultimate control over every part of the image because of the way it works. And it's called Nik, N-I-K. It's part of, I believe, DxO now. They own it, and you can look under there. Just go Nik Software, N-I-K Software, and Google will find it directly for you. What it allows you to do is work as if you're in a dark room. If I want to brighten up just this area a little bit and show that there's a door there, I still want to keep a dark shadow, but now I want to bring out the door. You notice this is the first one in all of them that you can actually see the door there. That's because I highlighted that area and brightened it just a little bit. I added more contrast here to these flowers and trees on the left, more highlight and shadow, creating more dynamic range between the walkway up. I worked on the building here to, you know, bring out the highlights around the windows, but bring down the walls so there's more separation there. So, you know, you're going to work on the images, and the more and the better you get, the more you work on images and the better you get at working and seeing in black and white, because that's basically what it is. It's seeing in black and white. the more you're going to really work on it and find detail of it, saying, oh, I just want to bring that out. Like here, simply put, going to desaturate and channel mixer on the left-hand side did an okay job, but that walkway, that marble walkway to the altar, I want to make that more contrasty. So what did I do? I went into just this area, made that more contrasty. The sides of the pews, I wanted to brighten those up a little bit more, so I brightened them up a little bit more. And of course, that ceiling, I don't want to lose any detail in that ceiling, so I was able to go to that ceiling and bring it down the midtones and shadows while maintaining my highlights, so you see a little bit more detail in there. And that's what I mean by seeing. It's seeing it in front of you when you're taking the picture, but then again, secondarily, it's seeing it when you're developing it or you're creating it. Printing and paper, that's a secondary thing. Black and white to me looks great on the screen, but it's meant to be printed on paper ultimately. So use Cardinal camera, get those black and white prints made. If you don't have your own printer, definitely go to them. And if you're new to them, definitely go to them to get your prints so you can see what a good black and white is. So to me, it really depends on the paper I'm going to use to the image that I'm shooting. This particular image of Diamond Beach in Iceland, there's a lot going on in here. There's a lot of tonal range. There's a lot of dynamic range. I may end up going a little bit on more of a pearl surface, you know, not high gloss, not matte. It's that in-between feel that has a little bit of texture to it because there's so much gray in there, so much tonal range in there that it may look best that way, you know, with that. I don't want it on gloss because I don't want it too contrasty. I like that middle gray that's going on in there. But a scene like this, I'm probably going to go more on the gloss side of a paper because it is black and it is white and a tiny bit of mid-tone there on the cloud line. This was purposely done in this almost ink on paper type look, and I think would look great on a higher gloss because those blacks will be super rich and those whites will be nice and bright. But then you have, say, fine art prints. That's where the fiber-based or the textured papers come in, where they look like old-fashioned paper. They tend to be slightly off-white, have a little bit of texture on the surface of them, and they're matte. And yes, I did soften this image knowing that that's the paper I was going to print them on. So it just generally has that softer feel because things get softened out in a more of a matte paper. So a scene like this as well, where I went way deep into the sepia toning and the dodging and the burning and all this stuff. Again, more of a paper fiber matte surface on here. And again, really toning it to give that old look. And there's a lot of fine detail in here. And what I try to do is make my images look as natural as possible. Yeah, obviously with the toning, you can tell I did something to it, but adding stuff that are subtle details to make the image look better. In the original image, before any dodging, brightening of highlights, you barely can see these windows in here, except for this one on the left. So just one of the small details of what I did is I just brightened up these windowsills and these panes so they just stick out a little bit more. So it gives a little bit more dimension to that face. So think about those small details. The great thing about digital is that you're not going to spend your week's paycheck on paper and chemistry to learn how to see in black and white. You're going to do it on screen. So it's just taking some screen time and computer time to really focusing on making and seeing these images the way you want and then creating them that way. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys all for coming today. If you have any questions coming down the pike that pop up to you later today, you can contact me one of these ways. You can go to hubbard@tamron.com. You know, you can contact me on my website or Facebook, Instagram, anything you want. I'm on Facebook a little bit more than Instagram, so that with social media, that's probably the best bet if you want an immediate response. But if you want the fastest, emailing is the best. So if anybody has some, I know I went a little bit overtime today, but I apologize for that. If anybody has Any questions? I'm more than happy to answer them. Is Patty going to come back? That's the question. Is she still there? But no video?
Well, there's no that's not necessary. So Tony, are you there?
I am
Yeah, he's there.
here.
He's there.
Hey, like I told you guys at the beginning, I'll take overtime with Ken anytime I can get it. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. And I love when I get to go and moderate a class and I get to learn something as well. And the few times we've been working with Ken certainly has been terrific. Ken, there's a couple of questions about HDR. Do you do any of your stuff shooting with HDR, or is it pretty much straight and then post-processing?
99% is straight out of camera. And that's where exposing correctly and exposing for what you have in front of you correctly is important. I'm not against HDR. I've seen some beautiful work with HDR. You just have to be careful. If you're trying to make it look natural or more of what you're seeing, not to go too far with it, because that's tends to be the case that sometimes it goes, that's a little too far. HDR, I think, is a fantastic thing, but cameras are getting wider with their latitude for dynamic range. So yeah, doesn't matter. Yeah, like I said, I've never wanted to say, no, don't ever do that, because like I've seen tons of great stuff done with it. I really like it for, that's where color to me comes in. Making them look like illustrations when you do push it, especially with neon lights, say in Vegas or, in a city somewhere where you have a colorful scene, doing an HDR there and almost making it look like an illustration more than a photograph. I've seen some beautiful stuff even that way. So.
And I just saw when you had mentioned Silver Effects earlier, and I was Googling it up. Right now, for those of you guys, software, we don't sell it. Right now, if you just Google Nick Silver Effects, DxO, the company that puts it out, has some tremendous deals. Even on their basic set, their basic collection is on sale right now for $100. If you don't have it,
awesome.
Terrific deal.
Yeah, and even the color images usually goes through Viveza, which is part of the Nick collection as well. When I'm processing color images as well, pretty much all of them at some point go through Viveza.
Gotcha.
So,
Terry's got a question about a specific monitor. Do you do, like she and I both, I edit pretty much everything on just a laptop monitor. Do you recommend something external or bigger or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I started, I had a career as a lithographer for about 5 years. So monitors were really, really important back then. I'm talking, I'm not going to say the years that was, but today's monitors have gotten so good. My suggestion is getting something like a Spider, or Tony, if you have something you suggest, like a Spider calibrator. Almost every screen today can be calibrated really well. That is my suggestion, because a lot of them are slightly off because they're backlit. And when you have a backlit media, it's never going to be 100% close to what you want, but with a calibrator, you can get it really close pretty easily today, especially. I mean, the first calibrator I used years ago, I was just like, I think I turned my monitor green. But yeah, the spiders and stuff like that today, I don't know if Color Monkey's still around, but I use Spider just because that's what I've been using for years. So.
Right. Bill had a question too. Do you use a Wacom tablet or anything like that for when you're processing and getting into details and things?
I used to have a gigantic one. I'm down to the little, I guess, whatever size this is now, 6x9 now. It's really nice and convenient, and it's wireless. So yeah, I use a Wacom tablet. When I'm really fine tuning stuff, I use the pen. I mean,
Gotcha.
I will admit at this point today, which hasn't been in a couple of years, I definitely use this when I'm doing gallery printing, because I'm really fine tuning and making sure the exact paper it's going to, because I'm going to have to adjust some of the highlights depending on the paper I'm going to, shadows depending on the paper I'm going to. So when you're really going into delving into selling your prints and stuff like that, I have multiple images of each image for a particular paper. Like a bamboo paper will be one image. Then if it's going on more of a gloss paper, there'll be a second one just for that, you know, depending, because I have to adjust my highlights and shadows accordingly.
You know, I think a lot of people miss out on that, and unfortunately, we don't do that fine art kind of printing. But definitely, the type of media that you're going to can make a huge difference in how you edit. I learned that the hard way, printing on glossy paper and printing on sugarcane paper and printing on metallic paper.
Yeah.
It's almost like starting off with a brand new image sometimes.
Yeah. The same way. It's like at first when I was doing my own printing here at home, it was almost as if I had my chemical back darkroom up again, and the amount of money I was spending and going through papers trying to really fine tune it. But that's where the calibrator comes in as well. You can calibrate for individual papers. So if you know you're printing to a certain paper, you can adjust your screen, say this one's going to Hahnemühle bamboo paper or whatever, you know. So Moab's high gloss or whatever, you know, you can actually adjust your screen to help you reduce, you know, the correcting to what it is. So it's pretty phenomenal today what you can do.
It's pretty, and I definitely know about that much when it comes to it, but I know just in the bit that I've done, it makes a difference. That kind of goes with a question that Ken just put up. Do you always shoot in color and then convert, or if you know that you're going to end up in black and white, do you shoot it monochrome? And I guess if you're shooting in RAW, I think I know the answer, but
Yeah, I always shoot in RAW, Adobe RGB RAW. You know, some of the cameras today you can do black and white RAW, which will allow you to convert back to color. So if I had one of those cameras, I may do that. But you know, I'm a creature of habit, so I still shoot in Adobe RAW. I tend to, like I said, when I know I'm shooting for black and white, I know it right away, and I'm just looking at everything in black and white anyway. So and that's just from years of doing this and practice. So I recommend those who have a camera that can shoot a raw black and white and are just getting into black and white, definitely shoot it that way, because you can always go back to color later. Get that confirmation of what the black and white image looks like while you're out there, you know, because if you can say, yep, this is going to work the way I want it to, or no, it's not at all, right there, then you won't be wasting time behind the computer. You can be wasting your time shooting out in the field, which is way more fun. So as much as I love this computer, I do like to reduce the amount of time that I'm behind it. So
oh man, I agree with you completely. If I can simplify the computer part, I'd much rather go shoot.
oh, yeah.
Lee has a question too, kind of following up with printing, and maybe that's something we can hit in the future. Do you use any kind of specialty inks, or are you just using kind of the standard ink set? And what printer, if you're printing at home, what do you print on? What machine do you use?
All right. So that is a world in on itself. And yes, that demands a whole nother one. To be honest with you, I mostly print on Epsons, and with the you know, the Epson inks, I do not turn my printers to monochromatic, which you can do. You can take your printers and flush them and then just put in nothing but tones of gray. I think when I finally make it big and I get images into the Louvre, I might invest in that. But because printers are so good, Canons are great, Epsons are great now, and they do a great job of black and white. I go straight to that. I will admit there is one guy that is a master printer out there that he's printed a couple of my images black and white. Michael Gilbert, I know he's a Canon printer liaison, and he does a lot for us on the camera side. He is truly a master of printing, and he basically just uses the inks that come with all the printers now. So, yep, yep. Yeah, like I said, you can invest in doing it, and your results will be stunning, but it will be pricey. So,
I mean, it's like everything. It's a balance of how much you want to spend, and you know, where's the kind of not the break even point.
right.
Because I've always been really satisfied with my Epson stuff and just a plain ink set and do the best I can when it comes to the editing stuff. But I'm gonna have to go back and review this later so that I can
There you
pick
go.
up some more of your stuff.
I'd invest in the optics more than the than the printer.
No doubt.
Just a Tamron plug.
Oh, look, man, it's just a good 17-inch printer. I love my
Yeah.
P800
Yeah, oh, yeah.
that I have at home. It's tremendous.
They're great, and I mean, coming from having a lithography background to seeing what we used to do on press to what printers do today, home printers do today, it's just stunning. It's amazing.
It really is. I'm amazed. Bill wants to know if we have any more future webinars with you. Bill, this is the last one that we have scheduled. But Ken, is the webinar schedule on the Tamron page?
Ours is gonna, well, Tamron's new series, the ones they're doing through Tamron will be announced tomorrow. And Patty's trying to say something. There she is.
Hello. As for webinars, we're going to really try to continue them in January, maybe more so in February, but we're open for ideas. We're definitely going to want to stay in front of you, and it'll probably be a little while before we're traveling and doing these live. So Tony, you and I will have to talk and see what we can do for the new year. We definitely want to keep doing this. So, and again, if anyone has certain topics, send them,
email us.
let us know what you want to hear about. Don't ask us to talk about other products though. We will talk about Tamron. You always see Tamron in our webinars, but you'll learn anything from landscape, night photography, everything imaginable. But if we haven't hit something that you are looking for, definitely let us know, and we will work on it. And I'll try to get Ken back as often as possible. The only way I can nab another photo,
Yeah. You do have one.
I have a couple.
Yeah.
I did buy a couple and give them as gifts, remember?
Yes. The horses?
The horse was getting framed. Thanks, everybody.
Somebody just asked how many black and white and gray cartridges. Depending on the printer you have, minimum of 3. I would look for a printer that has 3. I believe the large printer I have at work has 4 tones of gray, but most I think are about 3. The printers.
Yeah, I think most of the Epson's max at 4 because there's light, photo black, and then light gray, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I'd
have to check.
But yeah, you guys really, if you have any suggestions for a class and someone's asked about a long exposure class, you can hit up Ken directly. I put my email in the chat as well, and I can forward this on as Patty and I talk about, and she and Ken plan for our stuff in the future. Sure. I don't teach on Ken's level by any means, but we teach here local, so we do a lot of stuff too. Yeah, we'd love the feedback to create new stuff for you guys and keep this going. So we will be we'll be doing this for the foreseeable future. Thanks, you guys. Have an awesome week. Thanks everyone for coming in, and we'll see you again soon.